Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to talk about the Legends of Vox Machina, Amazon Prime, and we're going to talk about the worst moment in Season 1, Episode 1. Spoilers for all of Legends of Vox Machina. Spoilers through Episodes 1 through 6 in Legends of Vox Machina in this content. Alright, so what's the worst moment? It is, alright, so Vox Machina gets into a gigantic tavern brawl. Very Dungeons & Dragons, very classic Dungeons & Dragons. And Keyleth, the druid, played by Marisha Ray, she is a elf druid, played by Marisha Ray, and I think she has the noble background. So she's an elf druid with the noble background, and played by Marisha Ray. And this noble, this isn't very noble, but she does it. This noble pukes in the mouth of a half-hound, a dog person, like exactly the same, humanoid size and shape, but with the head of a hound, right? Like that, it's a non-player character, so it's totally okay because half-hounds are not a thing in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, which is what the engine of Vox Machina is. Vox Machina is a Dungeons and Dragons tale, right? It's told with Dungeons and Dragons from start to finish, right? And so basically, she pukes into the mouth of this half-hound in the middle of the fight, and then the half-hound pukes back at her. Okay, this is horrifically inappropriate, totally useless, gross, and it's exclusionary, right? Like, so it's interesting because I wouldn't bring this up, but Matthew Mercer has said very clearly that he wants Critical Role to be inclusive, right? And Critical Role, all the members there, they have a long list of people they want to be inclusive to, but they are very comfortable excluding anyone who cares about courteousness, anyone who enjoys Jane Austen books, anyone who has any type of politeness or gentility, right? Like you can't be putting people, puking in, one person pukes into another person's mouth and then they puke out, right? Now, the reality is this isn't wholly. So whose fault is this, right? This is Sam Riegel's fault, right? So Sam Riegel took Matthew Mercer in the wrong direction and said, let's make this NSFW, right? Because we could be billionaires, but why don't we be 100 millionaires, right, instead, or millionaires instead? Why don't we take whatever, success we have and just cut it in half, like Deadpool, right? Like, remember Deadpool was Fox and they went out of business, right? And they couldn't make $1 billion with any of the Deadpool films? Remember how making an NSFW made sure that they cut their money in half? Remember that? Let's do that, right? Like, so Sam Riegel. And basically what he did was he put Matthew Mercer on a Judd Apatow path. He's like, hey, you remember Judd Apatow, the guy that nobody remembers or cares about now, but was really big 5-10 years ago? Let's do that, right? Like, so, and that's the issue, is this isn't all, and this isn't even all Sam Riegel's fault. This isn't all of Matthew Mercer's fault. This is really Judd Apatow's fault, right? Because basically the moment Sam Riegel was like, let's make this NSFW, you're like, we need to make this spicy and shocking. The problem is, once you start going down that road and you go down into spicy, shocking road, right, it escalates quickly, right? And having and get this, the puking scene I just told you about, this was following another time where Keyleth puked, right? There's like 3 different puking instances in the show. And the reason there had to be was Judd Apatow did puke for shocking 10 years ago, right? And then they brought it and they're like, okay, well, here's a bunch of dudes puking. What could we do to beat that? Bridesmaids. Let's have women puke, right? Like constantly and grossly, right? On the screen, right? And then, so then when it gets to the point where Sam Riegel needs to put something interesting on the screen, puking is nothing, right? So you have to ramp it up, and you're like, well, the person pukes and then they perk into another person's mouth, and then the other person, they puke out again. So like it's kind of a ramp up, like, and it's just like, oh man, like this is really terrible. Like, and my sadness for this bad moment of the show is just that it cut so many people out, right? Like, It cuts young people out. It cuts anybody who cares about courtesy or gentility or civility out, right? And it's really sad because what Matthew Mercer is throwing down is really incredibly cool narrative stuff. But, the best of us, the people who still want to be like, we're humans, and there should be, maybe our, maybe DNF jokes aren't the height of entertainment, right? It just pushes them to the back, which is really sad. Now, all that said, I have to, I'm doing best and worst of both of every episode. That's my goal. And I have to say, I'm saying worst, and I think this was bad, and I really think the blame for this situation goes on Judd Apatow, right? And I think, and honestly, like, live by the sword, die by the sword. Like, I think Apatow's pretty irrelevant now anyway. So, like, it's so, his comeuppance has come, right? So it's okay. And the reality is just, I'm doing this best, this worst one. I love this show. I really, really love this show. It's just D&D on the screen and D&D in a muggle zone, right? Like, it's like, people are like, and I'm starting to realize, like, my son's a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime fan. And he's like, did you know Matthew Mercer, like, voices one of the Joe stars? And I was like, he does? Right? Like, and it's incredible, right? And my youngest son, he don't care two figs for Dungeons and Dragons, right? And that's totally okay. In fact, I'm kind of encouraging that. I think the best way to make sure your kids never play Dungeons and Dragons when they grow up is tell them how great it is and run it for them. Like, it's not a good model, right? Like, so, like, and so I'm hoping that, like, I think the path. So one, not D&D is my thing. It doesn't even be my kid's thing, right? So if so he may never come to Dungeons and Dragons, right? But he may also, right? Like, I really enjoy a lot of aggressive hobbies, right? Like, so, if I'm out bicycling in the woods, and I fall over and hit my head on a tree and die, like, that might bring him to D&D. It's like, oh, I want to remember my dad, so there's all these paths, right? But now, my son is like, oh, something I love is connected directly to Dungeons and Dragons, right? And Matthew Mercer did that. I'm so thrilled. So even though I'm saying this is the worst moment of this episode, I owe Matthew Mercer, right? I'm really big on this kick of, like, who do we owe, right? Like, and I know Americans are like, we don't owe nobody nothing, right? I'm not like that. I pay my debts, right? And I want to explain something to you. Money is for chumps, right? Like, the best things in the world right now are happening with things other than greenbacks, right? Like, money is for the simple people, right? Like, if you're going to be an evolved human, and that's what Gary is calling us to. He's like, accept your evolution, be who you are, right? And I want to respond to that, right? I think Gary Gygax called us to a higher evolutionary stage of humanity, right? And I want to meet it, right? And I think if you think that your only transactions are monetary, you're living at a lower evolved state, right? When we are given immense joy and given something that, and Matthew Mercer has given Dungeons & Dragons something that, if Dungeons & Dragons couldn't have bought this, right? If they had said, hey, we want you to create a stream show, if they had paid somebody, if they had said, hey, here's $1 million, make a stream show, and we want that to turn into a mega streamer television animated show 5 years later, they couldn't have purchased it, right? Like, the gift that Matthew Mercer has given every dungeon master, every dungeon player, every single WotC employee, it couldn't even have been purchased, right? And the reality is, it's so dramatically good, it's hard to say it could even have been imagined than what he would deliver, right? And so I think, if you're a dungeon master, you owe Matthew Mercer something now, right? Because he is catapulting the game forward, right? And he's doing that on his talent, and he's doing that, and I just want to take a minute to recognize it, right? Because I think a lot of Americans are like, I don't know nobody nothing, right? Like, and you're like, yeah, I that's a small shriveled heart and vision, But the reality is, if you are taking yourself seriously as a higher evolved human, right, you're going to realize that what you owe reaches far beyond dollars, right? Like, and actually, the deepest debts extend beyond the U.S. dollar, right? And so, I'm really thankful to Matthew Mercer for what he's accomplished, and and I'm curious, and like right now, what I can do to pay him back is watch the show. Why that's really critical, and watch it immediately, right? Like watch the show, watch it immediately. Oh, and here's another one, right? I know this sounds super weird. To pay Matthew Mercer back, I'm watching Jack Reacher, right? Like, so I went this week, right, to Amazon Prime, and I watched Vox Machina, and I loved it, right? And they have Jack Reacher on there, right? And Jack Reacher is man's adventure show, right? Like, it's a show based on a man's adventure book, an old adventure novel, like this really crusty old model. Like, it's Lee Childs is the author, and and so yeah, he's the author. And Jack Reacher is right there, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to stay right here on Amazon Prime, right? And before I leave Amazon Prime and go back to my favorite, HBO Max, or my second favorite streamer, Netflix, I'm going to check if there's anything else I want to watch on Amazon Prime. I want to help Amazon Prime. And the reason why is they track all this stuff. They know that I went right from trust and believe. There's a report that says this many people finished episode 6 of Legends of Vox Machina and immediately clicked on the ad we sent them to watch Reacher, right? And so they're going to be like, get Mercer back in here. Like, and if you got, and that's the issue, is Matthew Mercer tied the success of Dungeons and Dragons to Jack Reacher, right? He is crushing it. He is just doing such an amazing job. I'm so proud of the work he's doing. I'm so thrilled with what Matthew Mercer is accomplishing for Dungeons and Dragons, right? And every time somebody watches that show, they're like, what is this? And then they go, oh, this is a Critical Role show. Oh, and Critical Role picked the best game. They have the best streamed game in the world. So what did they use to produce it? The best tabletop role-playing game in the world, bar none, Dungeons and Dragons. So when it comes to quality, when it comes to adventure, when it comes to Matthew Mercer, that equals Dungeons and Dragons, right? And without a doubt, we are in a world now where very directly the fate of Dungeons and Dragons is tied specifically to the success and or failure of Matthew Mercer. And I think he's heading in a successful direction. Well, that's my opinion. What do you think was the worst moment in season 1, episode 1 of season 1, episode 1 of Legends of Vox Machina? And also, where are your unusual connections to Dungeons and Dragons? Where else do you think that Legends of Vox Machina may bring viewers in, specifically from the untouched Muggle community? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.